Welcome everybody to the Soul Centered podcast. We're excited to have an important conversation with you today about what are we talking about? Divine love, divine love, and it is a very important conversation. We just had Valentine's Day. We wanted to do kind of after the fact and really share with you some of these thoughts. But maybe before we jump in, how about we share a little bit about what's going on with us?
Sure. So, yeah, we are. You have a lot going on. You should talk about your Enneagram, actually.
I've been working hard on the Enneagram, really designing my own. The Enneagram is an ancient personality, energetic, psychological roadmap. And so I'm really invested into it and creating my own so that I can offer a program called Defy Your Enneagram. And it's working with me, getting an Enneagram assessment of your personality type. And then we set out to defy it in the work of Dr. Frankel. You shouldn't be limited by this personality assessment. You should be liberated by it. Excuse me. And so that's the work we're going to be doing together. And you can learn more on our website about Defy Your Enneagram.
Yeah. And so I have a fear and anxiety workshop coming up on February 26th at 9 a.m. Mountain Time. And really what it is, it's really not about fear and anxiety. What it really is it's about, so kind of what we're going to talk about today. It's about finding that true love within you in order to defy and move past that, the stuff of life, the human being, we're not that stuff of life. We are our essence. And really that's part of what we're going to talk about today. And so we have so many things coming up. And I just want to say how beautiful it is for the dance of Soul Centered, because the beautiful thing about our marriage and our business is that we are so different in the way that we come to the divine, right? Everybody's different the way they come to the divine. And if you find that path through working with B, then you are more of the Enneagram defiant spirit type of person. If you find it through healing and guidance and intuitive guidance, then, you would work with me. And sometimes we work together. And the beautiful thing is that we're a spiritual center that really works with all types of people. Really, the type of person really is the type of person that is striving for something deeper than just what we see in this world. And so there's room for all of you and all of us. And I think that's the most beautiful thing about Soul Centered. So with that, and truly it does come from a place of love. Really, that's really, I think, the essence of who we are. So why don't we dive into our discussion today?
Well, it's a good segue. Excuse me. I'm like here in Denver and constantly have a runny nose in this place. So I think it's an important starting point because people get hung up on this word God. God. Well, actually, some people prefer it. I talk with some clients who say, I prefer to use God, not divine.
Me too.
I have some clients say, I prefer to use divine or spirit. Some say, I don't care. And some say, don't use any of it. Right. So it doesn't matter. The labels that we put on things sometimes become their reality. So you have to put a reality on there that speaks with you, that works with you. And I think that's a very important starting point. It doesn't matter what you call this source, this essence, but the important thing is, are you in relationship? It's sort of like Valentine's Day, but it's not about the flowers and the candy and the cards.
I didn't get any of this.
That's why I said it's not about the flowers and the candy.
Did you actually forget it was that day? Because I didn't get that.
No, I was with Dr. Dan doing a podcast on love and thinking this is really weird.
And you were thinking of me.
But the point, though, is it's about the experience, right? What's underneath it and not the package. And so I think it's just an important starting point to acknowledge that. Call him, her, it, they, whatever you want. But we're going to be probably using a lot of divine, I imagine.
Yeah. I also think this concept of love, I mean, if you think about Valentine's Day, it really is a hallmark. It's a hallmark experience, right?
So it's not that important.
Clearly it wasn't. I didn't even mention it to you. I was just joking. But no, I mean, for us in our household, I don't know if it's just because it's not a Jewish thing or we lived in Israel or we just don't make a big deal out of it because every day is a love day. Right, honey? So no, but the point is that it really isn't we put so much pressure, and that's the problem. We put so much pressure on this idea of love. And there is so much, I think what I found is like there's a lot of expectation, not just around this day, but in general, to have our partner fill us up. And the word, the essence, the divine, the universe, whatever word you use, that is your source for love. And I see it as like almost like in Judaism, we have, when we do our Sabbath, there's a beautiful Kiddush cup. There's a cup that we use to pour the wine in, and everybody gets to drink from this one cup. And in some households, they have like you pour the wine, and then these little cups go, like the wine goes through this little like pathway, and then it trickles out to all of the little cups, and everybody, you know that? Everybody gets a little cup of wine from this one cup. And when I think about love, I think about this is where the love comes from. It comes from that one cup, and it's trickled down to everybody else. So when we are feeling the emptiness or the desolation or the loneliness, typically it's not, yes, it is sometimes we need more from our partner. We need to communicate, we need different things. But a lot of the time, we are being invited to first turn inward and upward towards ourselves and up into the divine to say, is there something like, is the essence being blocked? Is there something that's blocking me from the essence?
So let's keep going with that, because it reminds me of the Enneagram. No, but seriously, the cups are, the source trickles down into this world. And in Kabbalah, it's the tree of life. Right. Where you have, it sort of looks like a DNA strand kind of, and it's got like these circles. The different emanations of the divine. In the Enneagram, it's the same thing. There's 9 fundamental types of love and expression in this world, and we each experience it differently. That's the point. You have your cup down here, you have your the tree of life, or you have the Enneagram, all as roadmaps to show you that there's no one way to relate to the divine. And you have your way, and I have my way, and they have their way. And so in Kabbalah, there's 72 names of God, because and that's just representative of a lot, because there's an infinite number of experiences of the divine. And so it's like being with a lover. Like that lover is unique to you. You're unique to them. It's a unique experience. And I just think it's so important. I can't overstate it, to get out of this cookie cutter, this is God, and this is prayer, and this is love, and plug and play and go. It's supposed to be erotic, eros, from the deepest level of that word, not just erotic like 8th Avenue in New York, where it's blinking neon lights, XXX. I know that because I live there. Actually, 8th Avenue is not like it used to be. But the XXX erotic has been ruined. We've ruined this word eros.
Can I just say one thing? I was, this is what happens. I think that you hit on something really important. I was watching a documentary on sex, and this idea that the erotic is what we have seen in pornography. It's what we see in movies. It's like even the act of sex. If you think about the act of sex and you see a movie, an erotic movie or whatever, it's the woman.
You're just digging a hole here.
I am. Stop. If you think about it, there's a passion that is supposed to happen in this love relationship, in this sexuality. And there's a way to breathe, and there's noises, and there's all sorts of ways that we are supposed to be in love. And so what I've been reading about and watching this documentary about, and is what it's saying is like the passion, the eros that you're talking about, is actually when we're replicating what we have learned out in society, out in the world. Like you're saying, there's all these different numbers to the Enneagram. Each one is a different type of love. Mm-hmm. Each, you come to love very differently than I do. But where we all join is with the beloved, with the ultimate beloved, with the divine. So imagine, learning instead of, well, I have to have sex this way, or I have to be this way with a partner, and I have to love this way. Maybe even the breathing is different. Maybe when we invite eros in, that beautiful divine dance between masculine and feminine, maybe even the breathing is different. Maybe it is a much more soft, passionate, like type of love that includes the divine. I think of that book by Shmuley Boteach, God in the Bed. What is it? Kosher Sex. And then there's been a couple that he's written about that. This idea that, like, does God belong in the bedroom?
And it's sort of like the book Love Languages by Chapman. I forgot his first name.
Yeah.
Where we all have our different love languages. On Valentine's Day, if you give somebody a physical present and they're not a physical present person, maybe they're more words, they need words of affirmation or spending time, then you're not really connecting to their love language. But I would say the same is true in the spiritual realm. For some people, yoga is like the end all be all. And for some people, yoga is just another painful exercise. Some people like prayer. I don't resonate with prayer. It just doesn't work for me. It never has, which was always kind of a job hazard being a rabbi.
So true.
I used to sit under the talit, the prayer shawl, and everybody's reading the prayers, and I'm just breathing and counting my breath and silence. So for me, it's meditation, it's quieting. Other people, it's walking in nature. These are love languages of the divine, and that's eros, right? Eros can't be replicated. It has to be unique to you and your lover, or else it's not eros, it's something else. I was talking with Dr. Dan because we did this conversation on love. Did I talk about it here too? I was at a cafe a week ago or so, and there was an old couple there. Yeah. And they had an eros moment, and I watched it, and they were sharing a muffin or bagel or something. And it was just like I said before, he was like 112 and she was like 117, and it was slow and it was just thoughtful and loving, and the touch of it was so erotic. But that's not what we think of when we think of erotic.
Right.
And I just felt like I was watching divinity in motion.
Well, I think what you're touching on is, like, there's so many ways to be in relationship with the divine and each other. And one of those ways is that, being in this idea of eros is that a lot of us have forgotten that part of being in love with the divine and in love with each other and being in this relationship where we see each other is also allowing all of us to be present and allowing that vulnerability and those emotions and those shadows. And when we are taught, I was just talking to a client about how she wasn't taught how to express all of her. She was taught, like a lot of us, she was taught that all this bad stuff goes way over here and we're only allowed to present the good stuff. And the problem with being a true, quote unquote, lover, right, of God, of the divine, is that when we decide that we're going to take a chunk of us and separate out, fragment those pieces, then we are not a whole person. How can we expect to have an erotic, emotional, divine relationship with each other and God when a chunk of us is missing?
But I don't want to skip over this too quickly. To say we're supposed to have an erotic relationship with God would strike a lot of traditional religious people as, if not outrageous, or if not blasphemous, then outrageous.
Okay.
And before Ariela jumps in, and I want to say that it's actually the opposite. I think that we have turned religion into a G-rated movie. For adults, I call it pediatric religion, right? We've dumbed it down so that we could engage the kids, and that's fine, but it is a rated R, sometimes a rated X religion, whether it's Judaism or Christianity. Read these texts. They are based on some very dark and disturbing stuff, and they're also based on some very erotic stuff. The Hebrew Bible has so much eros in it, to the point where the rabbis ultimately forbid young men to have Song of Songs in their rooms because it was pornography thousands of years ago. Now it strikes us as kind of nothing, but you read it, it's actually about making love to the divine. And there's so much more, which I'll share with you, to the point where it's shocking what I'm going to tell you about the original structure of the synagogue.
I love where you're going with this, because I thought you were going to argue with me. And and the truth is that the word erotic, it conjures up, sex sex, pure raw sex. And the truth is that eroticism and being in love with the divine is about bringing your whole self, right? It is about, whether it's religious or not, it's about inviting the divine into all parts of you. But if we have compartmentalized ourselves, then we are not, there is not we're not conscious of that whole person. So it's really discovering that relationship within you.
I'll say it even more simply. It's standing naked in front of the
Right.
divine, in front of your lover, in front of the world. Compartmentalization is clothing, right? We compartmentalize, we hide. In Hebrew, the word for clothing, beged, is betrayal. The same, why? Because remember in the story of the Garden of Eden, it said that Adam and Eve they stood naked and they felt no shame. And then and then the snake crept into the garden. And what's the snake? It's not a stupid slithering reptile. It's Nachash. And what's Nachash? Doubt. Doubt entered into their relationship. And then they clothed themselves. They put on begadim, betrayal, right? They start compartmentalizing. They can't stand naked. The whole point of existence is to get back to that place of vulnerability, opening our hearts, standing naked, not having compartments, saying, this is who I am. That's divine eros.
Right. And so I have a question for you. Do you think that this is about you and the divine and also in relationship with someone that you love?
So in the original temple, the ark, if you go to Israel, you'll visit the Temple Mount. That's the retaining wall. That's all we have left. But originally it was this big ornate temple. And in the center of the temple is called the Holy of Holies. And in the Holy of Holies is where they house the ark. And it says, the Kabbalists say that above the ark was the picture of the cheruvim, of these two cherubs. But they weren't like chubby little cherubs, on Valentine's Day, Cupid type cherubs. They were a man or a masculine and a woman or a feminine, angels naked, immersed in sexual union. And so the mystics, at least from a Kabbalistic perspective, say that the human models the divine. And so if we want to connect with the divine, we need to unite masculine and feminine. For some, it's heterosexual. For some, it's homosexual. For some, it doesn't matter. It's masculine and feminine, bringing these two energies together. And love making can be a pathway to eros. Right. It's not the only pathway, but let's be honest. It's not only the most fun pathway, but it's also the most obvious pathway, because we know that because we can create babies.
Right.
The divinity.
Right. I think that you hit on, so many wonderful pieces and important pieces. One thing that I think is really important for our listeners and for just being in human bodies is that often we feel like we don't give ourselves permission to tap into those untamed parts. Right? When I think of the dance between masculine and feminine, I think that we are starting to move through it, but I think that we predominantly live in a very masculine world. I mean, even as for me, who's a very feminine person, I very much struggle with the masculine world. And so what happens is when we are being called to be that eros person, to be that, untamed or vulnerable person, we don't have practice. Mm-hmm. We're not, our world, our quote unquote regular world does not train us or teach us how to be wild, how to be untamed inside of us. I read a quote that said, to balance the masculine and feminine, I'm going to paraphrase, means that you live within this untamed, like you hold the untamed wild piece of you where there's wild animals and mountains and trees and grass and wildcats and deer all inside of you, right? So like anything is possible inside of this container. The container is the masculine, right? But the untamed is the divine feminine. And it is really starting to have the language and the experience of what that divine feminine feels like in order to experience that that union.
And you don't have to, I mean, again, it's not about sex. You don't have to be with somebody else. It's another way to train us, like you're talking about, to help us embody it and feel it and get to that place. But it's a means, it's not an end. Because, the greatest mystics of all time tended to be monks, monastics. And, so they were harnessing it. When I lived in Sfat before I met Ariela, it's the north of Israel. It's the home of Kabbalah. I lived there for about a year. And the high holidays came, and I heard people screaming at midnight down in the wadi, in the riverbed, like, down below the town. And I remember asking somebody, what is that? They're like, that's how the Kabbalists get ready for the high holy days. They don't go sit in an air-conditioned synagogue and say, please rise and please sit and please turn to page 145 and now read the prayers. They're screaming. What are they screaming? Abba, which means daddy. Abba, all night long. It's like jarring. Why? Because they're getting ready for ecstasy, right? For intensity. They're coloring outside of the lines. And I think, we have such a problem today with religion. People are walking away, I think, because nobody really wants to color in the lines anymore. It doesn't work. And I would argue it's not authentic. This is authentic, that wild dancing in the moonlight kind of energy.
Right. The challenge is that we, you think about regular life or even bring it into the face of religion, which is another, side part. We're overworked, we're exhausted, we have too many, screens going on at one time, and ultimately we've lost our breath. And if you think about the portals inside of our own bodies that are set up for this erotic or eros relationship, the first thing that always comes to mind is the breath. But because we are so overworked, because we are so prone to be more masculine, doesn't matter what your gender is, because we are all taught to be more masculine than to dance with this essence, we don't know how to get to that place of divine eros. And I think about, obviously this is a podcast for men and women and all genders, but I think specifically about women and how so many women that I see, they, especially in midlife, they're like, I don't know where my sexuality went. I don't know how to find it. I don't know, it might've been there, but now it's gone. And I think about, as a woman and men too, like as we hit that midlife and beyond period, there is this sense of being exhausted. There's an exhaustion and a question, an invitation of, you've done it this, we used to talk so much about the afternoon of life. And it is really true, I think, in this sense. You're not supposed to read Kabbalah or study Kabbalah until you're 40. And there's a reason for it. Like you're building up and you're working and you're in that masculine energy. And then you hit this period, whether you're 70 or 50 or everywhere in between, where life says to you, like, okay, you've done the overworking thing. And now you're being asked to figure out that wild nature inside of you, but we don't know we don't know. We're too exhausted. We lost our breath. We can't function at 9 o'clock at night. We go to bed early. We're exhausted. So it's like, it's an interesting dance to like say, great, let's be eros, but we have to pay the bills.
It's true. I think that's why in the afternoon of life, you have a shot at real eros, because the morning of life is so much intensity, but it's so physical. It's so physiological, right? As a man, testosterone is just too high. That's why the Kabbalists say 40, because your testosterone starts to drop, and your thinking becomes more clear because you're raising the center of your intelligence up to here. And you can see the world now without just testosterone and all that it has to offer. It's great for warriors. It's great. I want my soldiers, at 18 to go out and fight. But when you get older, it starts to shift. And so there's a different type of energy, is my point. Mm-hmm. It's not as wild or erratic or intense, but it is much, I think, more pure. It is much more harnessed, or at least you have the potential to harness it. Right. You've got to get off the screens. You've got to make time for it. You've got to cultivate it. But it's sort of like the difference between drinking from a garden hose and drinking from a fire hose.
Right.
The morning of life is a fire hose. And you just see it when you're around 20 somethings. Our
Mhm.
son is entering that space. It's just like a fire hose, and they can't go. It's just,
Right.
So I think that it's the beauty of the afternoon of life is it is more of a feminine,
It
and
is.
the morning of life is more of a masculine. And you merge these two things together, which is, by the way, the Star of David is the masculine and the feminine, or vice versa. The cross, Christianity, is the masculine and the feminine. It's an intersection of these two. That intersection, to me, is where you meet Eros.
Absolutely. And I think the beauty of getting older is, as you said, the masculine decreases a little bit and there's more space. You're being invited to explore a completely different part of you. I always attribute the divine feminine as these portals inside of us. Like if we are too outwardly focused and too busy and too masculine in our lives and overworked, then we don't get introduced to this beautiful the many portals of the divine feminine. And part of it is the body, right? Like so um in in many religions we're not allowed to think, we're not, we're taught not to transcend the body. And really, the shamans believe like the mysticism happens because you are a body. Because you are a body having a spiritual experience here, your body has portals and entryways. In yoga, it's like the nadis, I think. There's all these energy centers or the chakras, or, in Judaism, it's the sphirot. There's all these different ways in which when we're older or when we pause enough that we can enter into this erotic or eros relationship right through the body, right? Like your body is not just a bag of bones. Your body has these entryways where there's mysticism. I mean, I was with a client the other day she's midlife and going through just like the release of all her children in her home. So she has all this time now and she's entering these beautiful mystical experiences just in the center of her own home. She doesn't have to go anywhere to do it. But that's the dance now, is to find the space in our lives, whether you're 30 or 70 and everything in between. We all have the ability to create a little bit more space and time to cultivate that divine feminine.
I think that's why yoga is so popular, because really Christianity and Judaism don't have embodied practices, and most Americans are Christian or Jewish. And so we've imported a great embodied practice in yoga because people want to feel it. And there's a big difference between doing yoga and going to a yoga exercise class, right? A lot of these places are just another form of exercise. Fine, totally fine, but that's not really the point of yoga. The point of yoga isn't to burn calories. The point of yoga is to embody divinity, embody this, have an erotic body movement practice. So I think we do it a disservice when we treat it as just another masculine achievement checkmark doing, versus I need to experience divinity through movement, not just through sitting. It's, again, the difference in going to the gym and going to on a nature walk,
Right.
right? Not a hike, a walk where you get to feel, and you're not people always say to me, what do you mean by divine masculine and feminine? And masculine is important.
Mm-hmm.
Like feminine just goes around and around and around. Masculine just goes forward, forward, forward. You need the intersection of those two things. I think of it as the difference between a circle is feminine, a line is masculine. We could have a whole conversation on that. And then the intersection is a spiral. You're moving forward and you're going around and around. And so there's progression, but there's also relationship. And so finding that synthesis is so hard. But I feel like that's really what we're talking about. In the afternoon of life, you still have vibrancy to do the masculine things, like go on a walk, like go on a hike, like go to a yoga class. But it's no longer just about how many calories do I burn.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, I think it's very, very important to strike the balance. I always think of the masculine as it's the container that holds the feminine, right? If you are just all divine feminine, you can't move forward and you get stuck. There's the circle. And then that container is the masculine that helps contain the energy in order to, like, meditation is the container through which you experience the divine. And it's the same like a true yoga class or a true hike. So those are the ideas that we have for our listeners to really look at ways in which you can experience the divine. I will say that because there's so many issues with expecting our partners to fill that space. And I think the part of like, even though we didn't intend on talking about the afternoon of life, but I think the afternoon of life is really understanding that we can only go so far with our partners. You can experience that together, that, that magical, mystical qualities. But if you don't have it for yourself, you want to start cultivating this awareness within for your body, for yourself, to create this divine relationship. And then imagine what it's like when you bring it to your partner. And I'm not just talking about sex. This is emotionally, spiritually, physically. Being in this divine dance with a partner means that you are taking care of your side of the street. You are dancing with your divine. Is your masculine too masculine? Is your feminine too feminine? Where is your balance? And how can you take care of your side of the street? So then you can enter into this relationship as a whole being. And that's, to me, like going back to that whole Hallmark, Valentine's, it is acknowledging the other person and expressing yourself and being in relationship. But it's also remembering that you are a whole person, no matter if you are in partnership or not. You have the ability to be in this like deep love relationship with the divine and your whole self.
And I'll end with just reiterating, and I think I want to have a whole podcast on this, of, divinity is not some pure, saintly, pietistic, this kind of version of the divine. That's a way to look at God. But what if God is lover, right? Lovers, are wild, and there is ecstasy. And so it's not about the physical sexual union you have with somebody. It's about, how do you relate to the divine? What if God is lover? How do you show up and talk to her? How do you experience her or him differently than if God is the king, if God is the father, right? Which are more of these traditional notions, which have their place, but we also need to reclaim this kind of wild ecstasy, radical relationship with the divine.
So with that, we hope you enjoyed our podcast today. Don't forget to check us out on our website to find out about all the most current events happening at www.mysoulcentered.org, and check out our newsletter. We are starting to explore. We have so many different offerings in our podcast. So we want to create that for you, so you have a venue to go straight to our podcast and learn more about these things and more about the soul and the divine every single day.
Yeah, and I've divided up my podcast just to kind of keep this channel clear for Ariela and I. So this is the Soul Centered podcast. You can jump over and download the Defiant Spirit podcast, where I do a lot of interviews and conversations with other people. And then Money and Soul, which is a new podcast I'm starting as well. So got lots of choices. Jump over to My Soul Centered, and we'll see you next time.
Shalom. Namaste.
Salam. Namaste.